Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns. I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through my website YarnAddict.co.uk. You can find all my links below this video. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to share my top 5 knitting tools and notions. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. So I did a video recently where I went through like all my knitting tools and notions and how I stored it and things like that. But I thought today I would share like my top 5 ones. If I had to get rid of everything and I just could choose 5 things that I cannot live without, these would be what I would choose. So that's what I'm sharing today. And please share with me in the comments what your top 5 or even top knitting tools are. Obviously the first one is obvious. We need knitting needles. So my first one is knitting needles, but it's not just any knitting needles. We need knitting needles. We can't knit without knitting needles. Well, you can do finger knitting, I guess, but we need knitting needles. But my top tools that I could not live without are interchangeable knitting needles. So I have the Chao set. My first set of interchangeable knitting needles were, I don't know what they were called. They were an American brand many years ago. I can't remember what they're called, and they were rubbish. I probably shouldn't say what they were called either, because they're rubbish. I've not heard of them for years. I don't even know whether they're still around. They were rubbish. They were just so awful. So I didn't really use them very much. And then a few years later, Knit Pro brought out their first set of interchangeable needles, the Symphony set. I don't even know what they were called Knit Pro at the time, but I bought those as soon as they came out and I loved them, and for years that's what I used. I no longer have them. I bought loads of extras, loads of extra cables, needle tips. I bought the whole set plus loads of extras. I used them for years, and then I was at a show in London, small show in London, I can't remember what it was called now, and I saw Chao needles. They're fixed circular needles, and I like trying new things, so I bought some to try and I love them. They were just so lovely to knit with, but they weren't interchangeable, so I bought loads of fixed circular needles from Chao, and what I liked was that their cables don't kink. So their cables don't kink. I actually have several videos on different needle brands. So I have review videos on Chao, Knit Pro, Licker, Prim. The Prim one is not the interchangeable ones, but in the Licker and Knit Pro and Chao ones I talk about interchangeable ones. I also have a video on circular needles and how and why you might want to change the circular needles. So I'll link all that below, and I'll link the playlist at the end of this video as well. So if you fancy looking at that, please do. So I brought loads of Chao fixed circular needles, which I really liked. And then they brought out the interchangeable set, and it came in a case like this. I think the Knit Pro ones come in their own cases now, but they didn't at the time. At the time, they just came in like this plastic thing. And it came in a case which I really liked, and you could choose whether to buy like a small set which only had like the smaller sizes, or like a big set which had the larger sizes, or a set that had all of them. So I actually bought the set that had all of them. I don't actually use the larger needles very much. In fact, I've taken most of them out and put them somewhere else. I've got up to 8mm here, but I've taken 9 and 10s and stuff out because I just don't use them. And then I've obviously bought loads of extra, because there's loads of needle tips in here, so I bought loads of extras. I like the metal ones. They do also do wooden ones. I had one set of the wooden ones just to try them. I'm not as keen on them. They are fairly pointy compared to a lot of other wooden needles. I just don't use wooden needles very often. I do occasionally use my Licker ones, which are also wood, but I don't use wood very often. I mainly use my metal ones. So I bought loads of extra tips over the years. I like this case. The cords fit in here. If you watch my recent knitting tools video, which I'll link below, you will have known that my cables were basically, I had too many for this, and I was struggling to find the right size, so they are all in different pouches like that now, in this big pouch that I keep all my knitting needles in. So that lives in there. So the one thing I could not live without is my interchangeable needles. Whatever is your favorite brand, doesn't really matter. Just find a good brand of interchangeable needles, and for for me, they just changed my knitting life, because I can just mix and match the length of cables and the needle tip sizes, and I just, yeah, I love them. I would say if you really don't like circular needles, give them a go. If you knit with the needle under your arm, I don't know which arm it normally is, that one I think, then it probably won't work for you. But if you knit like holding your hands like I would say normally, but that sounds a bit judgmental. I don't mean that judgmentally. But for most knitters, I think circular needles are great. And if you're going to go for circular needles, you might as well go for the interchangeable ones. I meet a lot of people who say they struggle to like fasten them properly. Sometimes that's because they're not fastening them tightly enough. Depending on which ones you choose, they come with tools that you use to like screw them on properly, and you need to use that tool correctly. I talk about that I think in my Knit Pro, because there's particular Knit Pro that this seems to be a problem with, probably because they're the most popular ones. So I think I talked about that in my Knit Pro video. But I haven't tried the Addi. Addi? Yes, Addi. I get Addi and Aldi mixed up. Aldi is a supermarket. Addi are knitting needles. I haven't tried the Addi click, I think they're called. I haven't tried those, but I've been told that you just click them into place. So if you have a problem with the needles coming off while you knit, then Addi might be worth a try. But I have not tried Addi, so I can't tell you whether they are or not. But I know some people who use Addi and they love them. So that's the one knitting tool I cannot live without. Second thing, which I use in every single project, whether I really need it or not, is a row counter. These are my favorite ones. These are the Clover Mini Catcher. Reason I like them is because they have this little lock on the side. So when I put in my knitting bag, I lock it so that I don't accidentally click it. It's easy to see. It's easy to reset it by just using these things on the side. It's small. I'm going to just reset it to 0 so I don't pick it up later and wonder which project it's from, because it has numbers on it. But I do really like this. I have loads of these. I usually pop one in every single project bag, whether I really need it or not. Like at the moment I'm knitting socks. I don't really need it for counting the rows on my socks, but it's in there anyway because I just like them. And if I run out of these, I know I have too many projects on the needles. You can get other types of row counters. Like this is something that just arrived. This is from Knit Pro, and it's the Knit Counter Rings. This is the largest size. I had one before which was a smaller size and it didn't fit me. This is the size 12 and it does fit on my chubby fingers. And these, if I can get it off, yeah, there we go. These, you just turn them to use them. And I didn't use the one I got before very often because it was, I guess it was size 11. It's a bit small, but I just got size 12s. So I haven't used them yet, but I'm interested to see what they're like. Knit Pro also do row counters that are similar to this. Clover also do another one which is red and it's bigger and it doesn't lock. You can get ones that you fix onto the end of your needle. I've never used those. I don't really like those. You can get apps on your phone where you can count rows. I used to have an app on my phone. I don't know if I still got it on my phone. There's some apps where you can count several projects at a time. I quite often watch videos and things on my phone when I'm knitting, so I don't necessarily want to have an app on my phone, because then if I'm watching videos I have to come off the video to go into the app to click it and things like that. So I prefer having these row counters, and I use them in every single knitting project. Next thing is stitch markers. So this is my tool tin, which I talk about in my knitting tools and notions video. There are different types of stitch markers that you can get. The ones that I use the most are, let me just get a couple out, are these ring markers. So I have these little tiny ones. They're from Coconuts. I prefer ring markers that are fairly plain. You can get fancy ones. Let me see if I got some fancy ones in here that I like. Hang on. I've got some that are like different shaped ones, like these are like hexagon shaped ones. They're quite nice. You can get ones which have, there we go, which have dangly bits, like handmade ones. They're nice, but I always worry about them getting caught in my yarn. I tend to knit with quite fine yarn quite a lot, so I do worry about them getting caught in my yarn. So I use the plain ring markers the most. My favourite ones are the coconut ones because I tend to mainly knit with small needles and they fit quite nicely on up to 4mm needles easily. And then I also like these bulb markers. I have these metal ones which I really like. They come in loads of different colours. I think they may be coconuts as well, although I think I've got some that are not coconuts. Quite often hand dyes will attach some of those to their tags and things. You can also, some like slightly more expensive clothing brands will put instead of attaching a label to the clothes with those kind of plasticky things, they will use these things, usually in black. So I've said to my daughters, if they buy clothes to have these things, to keep them and give them to me. They're usually black, I think. So I really like those. They are really good for like marking progress. So if you get to a certain point, you can put a marker in and you want to see how much you knit the next day, or I quite often will move them up for podcasts and things so I can tell, you know, where I was at the last time I recorded a podcast. Or if you want to count increases or decreases, if I'm doing a certain number of increases or decreases, I mean, I can usually see it, but if I put a marker every time, it just means I don't have to go back and search for it and count it. I can just count how many markers I've got. I did say that in a workshop once, and somebody said, well, surely you can just see it and go back and count. And I was like, yes, I can, but this way I don't need to. I can just count markers and it's much quicker. I can also just count the number of stitches on the needle, but if I want to double check and I want to do it quickly, that's a lot quicker to just count the number of markers. I use it on my socks to mark different sections on my socks. So for example, my current socks in progress, I use them. I put one, hang on, that's a marker to mark where I got to on the recent trip where I started from. So I got one here to mark the end of the sock. Now, I don't really need that here because I changed into like a rib pattern. But if I just do stocking stitch, I want to count the number of rounds I'm knitting from the end of the toe. So I put one of those markers in at the end of the toe, and then I put another one in up here where I put in the waist yarn for the afterthought heel. And then I usually put one in where I start a rib, and it just makes it easier to know where I'm counting from to make sure that my socks match. I do also have a row counter in here, but I still, when I think I've knitted, I don't know, so I'm doing 70 rounds. When I think I've knitted 70 rounds, I always go in and double check that I have actually knitted 70 rounds. I also have these stitch markers, which are beaded ones. I quite often use these as progress markers as well. They're a bit kind of prettier. These padlock markers are also really good if you drop a stitch and you can't pick it up straight away. Say you need crochet hook to pick it up, or you're not sure how to pick it up and you're slightly panicking about it, you can just put one of those padlock markers or those bulb markers in, and it'll keep your stitch from unraveling further. You can get them in plastic from Knit Pro and Clover, and they look like little padlocks, which is why I tend to call them padlock markers, but I think most people call them bulb markers because the metal ones look like bulbs. So I love those and I use those a lot. Next item on my list is really two items. It is my ball winder and Swift, and for me they kind of come in a pair. Ball winder, if you buy a lot of yarn in hanks like those on the shelf behind me, you've got to wind it into a ball in order to knit with it. You can do that just by holding it. You can get somebody else to hold it. So when I was growing up, we used to quite often sit there and hold them for my mum while she wound it up. So you can do that, get someone to hold it for you. You can put it over the back of a chair. I quite often just put them over my knees. Sometimes it can get a bit tangly and messy, but it works perfectly well. If you are winding a lot of yarn, having a ball winder is perfect because it winds it into really good center pull balls, really neat balls, and it's a lot quicker. This is a Knit Pro one. I have a video on this set, which I will link below, where I talk about how it works and my opinion of it. I used to have a smaller one, plasticky one, which works fine, but it was a bit just cheap and not that great. So I decided to get this. It is quite big. I think this works really well if you've got plenty of space, and maybe you have a space where you can keep it up permanently. I don't, and it doesn't store that easily in my office really, so it is a bit big. I wish I did a smaller version. I have an electric ball winder as well, but it is currently broken and I don't know whether it's worth getting it fixed or replace it. That's attached to the end of my desk and I really need to remove it because it's not working. But I did used to love it when I used to do hand-dyed yarn. I used to wind yarn for customers. I really used to love it. And then I've got this Swift from Knit Pro. This is quite a big one. I think this is called an umbrella Swift, I think. You can set at different sizes. It goes up to, I think, a 2-meter skein. This one has to be attached to the end of the table, which is a little bit of a pain because if your table is too thick or too thin or it curves at the edge, which our dining room table does, then it doesn't attach very easily. I have a wooden board on my dining room table that I use for recording videos on tutorials and online courses and things and take photos, and I pull that board off the edge of the table and attach this to that board. Which is a little bit of a clunky way of doing it, but it works. I am actually thinking about getting a new Swift from somebody else. More about that if I decide to get it. But this works perfectly fine. It's not too expensive. There is one that's sold on Amazon, which is similar to this, but it's metal and plastic, I think. And it's quite cheap. And I did have one for a while, and I no longer have it. I binned it because it just drove me mad. There was lots of like metal bits in it and my yarn just always got caught and I didn't like it. So be careful about buying something really cheap and nasty or really cheap. Ask people you know who got Swifts and ask them for their recommendations. I do think it's worth spending a little bit more to get one that's a little bit better quality. I like this one. I can't remember how much it was. It's Knit Pro, so it's not ridiculously expensive, but it's probably a little bit more. And you do need to attach it to something, so just bear that in mind. The one I'm thinking about getting is freestanding, so but I just need to email the seller with a couple of questions before I make up my mind. Now, if you're going to have a ball winder, you really need a Swift because otherwise somebody's got to sit there and hold the yarn for you to use the ball winder. It's difficult to hold the yarn yourself and use a ball winder. So if you're going to get a ball winder, you really need a Swift. You can use a Swift without having a ball winder. You can put your yarn around here and then wind it by hand rather than winding it on a ball winder. So Swift will work on its own, ball winder won't. I've had a few different Swifts over the years. I have another one. Hang on, if I can manage to put this down over here. I have another one, which is, I think it's called an Amish Swift. It's really pretty, but it does move around my table a bit, so I don't really use it very often. But it's freestanding, so it doesn't need to be attached to anything. I don't actually know where it is. Oh, it's down here. But the Knit Pro one is the one I use. If I'm just winding a skein of sock yarn, I will quite often just put it over my knees and wind it. I only really get my Swift and ball winder out if I'm winding several skeins of yarn for like a design project. The last thing that I'm going to talk about that I can't live without when it comes to knitting tools is my tiny scales. These are, this is the second pair I had. The first pair I had, I can't remember whether this pouch came with these or whether that was from my previous pair. I can't remember, but I bought a pair years ago at a yarn festival from an indie dyer, and I used it so much. Next time I saw her at a show, I'd buy another one. And I used those for years, but eventually the lid broke off and cracked, and then on one of them the door that holds the batteries in place broke, and in the end I decided I really should treat myself to a new one. So there are loads of these on Amazon. I have no idea why so many are for sale on Amazon, but I will let you use your imagination. But they are called pocket scales, and they're really good. They will only wind small skeins of yarn. I saw somebody the other day talk about these, and she's got one where you can actually take this lid off and put that on top of the scales, but I don't think mine doesn't come off. So she said that she could take this lid off and put it on top of the scales like a tray to wind slightly larger balls. I don't think mine does that. I don't want to. Oh, it does, but I think I've broken it. I think I broke it anyway. So if you get one where it comes off without breaking it, you can put it on top like that and then put your yarn on top, and it'll weigh slightly bigger skeins. It's a bit broken off there, so I think I may have broken mine, which is annoying. I have two of these. I got my old ones, which doesn't have the lid because the lid broke, and then I got these new ones where I've just broken the lid. So I might actually buy another pair since I've broken the lid. I can still use it. It's not the end of the world. But it is useful to have the lid because it stops you pressing the buttons when it's in transit. I think this pouch is from my old one. Pouch is quite useful for traveling because it just protects it, but I don't think the pouch came with these. But I'm not going to link these specific ones below because there are loads of them on Amazon, depending on your budget. Check the size of them because they do vary in size. And just choose some that fits your budget. So wherever you are in the world, if you've got Amazon, search on Amazon. If you're in a country that doesn't have Amazon, because Amazon is not in every country in the world, which I didn't realize. I thought Amazon was kind of like everywhere, but in Norway you can't order from Amazon, but there are other websites you can order from. So just look for pocket scales and you will find them, I'm sure. Okay, that's it. So those are my 5 most used tools that I cannot live without. My interchangeable knitting needles, my row counter, my stitch markers, my Swift and ball winder, although I could probably do without those. If I was going to have to give up one of these things, it'd probably be my Swift and my ball winder, but it is useful if I'm winding a lot of yarn because it does save me a lot of time. It's just sometimes I'm too lazy to put it up. If I could have it up in my office permanently, I would use it every time I wound yarn. But because I can't keep it up in my office permanently, I have to take it downstairs, set it up in the dining room, take it back up again. If I set it up in the dining room, sometimes I leave it there for several days or weeks, which is not too popular with the rest of the family. So I could probably live without that if I had to, but I would prefer not to live without it. And then finally, my tiny pocket scales. Okay, so that is my 5 most used tools. Let me know in the comments what your 5 most used knitting tools are. And thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. I will link my full knitting tools and needles and notions video below, where I share all my knitting tools, needles and notions and how I store them. And I'll also link my cycling needle and needle review playlist below as well. So if you haven't watched those videos, do go and take a look. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.